June 24th, 1944. Roughly 150 miles southwest of Kagoshima, Japan, Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane leaned into the periscope inside the control room of USS Tang, his pulse steady but his mind electric. What he saw through that glass made his blood chill with anticipation. 6 enormous freighters, shielded by 16 escort vessels, the largest Japanese convoy he had yet encountered in 3 grueling war patrols. Through the lens he could make out the merchant ships heavy with men, vehicles, and supplies. Lifeblood for Japan's collapsing Pacific front. Behind him, the control room was silent except for the hum of instruments and the faint creak of the hull. The crew waited, tense and motionless. They had shadowed this convoy for over 4 hours, stalking it with the patience of a predator, maneuvering Tang into the perfect firing position. Below the deck plates rested 24 torpedoes, each a 3,000-pound cylinder of steel and explosive force, capable of ripping a cargo ship in two. O'Kane's mind flicked through the numbers: bearing, range, angle, depth, a rapid-fire sequence of mental calculations. He had learned these skills under the tutelage of Commander Dudley "Mosh" Morton aboard USS Wahoo, a man whose audacity and precision had made him legend across the Pacific. Now, as Tang's commanding officer, O'Kane was proving himself the next step in that evolution: bolder, sharper, deadlier, what the Imperial Japanese Navy could not comprehend, despite mounting evidence and staggering losses, was that American submarine warfare had transformed into something their doctrines could not counter. The boats were faster, stronger, and their torpedoes finally reliable. Commanders like O'Kane had refined the art of underwater warfare into a cold science of destruction. Japan's fate was no longer being decided in grand surface battles. It was being rewritten in the silent depths by unseen hunters. Tang's journey to this moment had begun 9 months earlier at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo, California. Her keel was laid on January 15, 1943, another product of America's roaring wartime industry, which was now producing submarines at a rate that would have seemed impossible only 2 years earlier. On August 17th, she slipped into the water for the first time. She was a Balao-class submarine, 311 feet, 10 inches long, displacing 1,526 tons on the surface and 2,424 tons submerged. The Balao design represented the cutting edge of American undersea engineering. Her pressure hull was forged from high tensile steel, enabling her to dive to depths of 438 feet, far below what earlier classes could endure. That extra margin of depth often meant the difference between survival and destruction. Japanese depth charges, calibrated for shallower targets, would detonate harmlessly above. Earlier Gato-class boats could only reach about 300 feet, barely enough to escape a determined hunter. Tang carried 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 in the bow, 4 in the stern, granting her lethal versatility. The forward tubes were arranged in 2 vertical tiers of 3, allowing her to unleash a devastating salvo in seconds. The stern tubes gave O'Kane the ability to strike even while retreating, turning an escape maneuver into a counterattack. Each torpedo weighed more than 3,100 pounds and contained a 575-pound Torpex warhead, powerful enough to shear a freighter's spine in a single hit. With an effective range of over 6,000 yards, Tang's torpedoes could kill from beyond the horizon. Propelled by a diesel-electric drive, Tang could make 20 knots on the surface and nearly 9 knots submerged. 4 diesel engines powered her propellers, while charging massive batteries. Submerged, she ran silently on electric motors, able to glide unseen for nearly 2 days if required. This dual-mode propulsion gave her unmatched tactical freedom to sprint ahead of a convoy on the surface, dive unseen, strike with electric stealth, then surface again to vanish at high speed. Just as important was her endurance. A Balao-class boat could patrol for 75 days without refueling, covering 11,000 miles at 10 knots, long enough to range from Pearl Harbor deep into Japanese home waters and return. Tang stores could sustain 87 men for 3 months in enemy seas, Range, firepower, and stamina combined to make her the ideal weapon for strangling Japan's maritime arteries, the lifelines that fed its empire. Tang was officially commissioned on October 15, 1943, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane. At 32 years old, he was already a veteran of the undersea war, a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy class of Fossen 934, and a protege of the late Commander Dudley Mush Morton. O'Kane had served as executive officer aboard USS Wahoo, participating in 5 patrols that sent 20 Japanese ships to the bottom. Those months under Morton's command forged his philosophy of submarine combat: relentless pursuit, split-second decision-making, and precision gunnery. When Morton took Wahoo on her 6th patrol in October 1943, O'Kane remained behind to prepare Tang for duty. 4 days before Tang's commissioning, Wahoo was lost with all hands in the La Perouse Strait. The news struck O'Kane hard. Morton's death left a void in the submarine force, and a challenge for O'Kane to carry forward his mentor's fearless legacy. But O'Kane was not a mirror of Morton. Morton's style was raw aggression, a thunderbolt charging headlong into convoys, trusting instinct and audacity. O'Kane combined that same courage with mathematical precision. He turned submarine warfare into a system of calculations and drills. He drove his crew relentlessly, training them in periscope recognition, range estimation, and fire control until they could execute attacks almost wordlessly. He introduced new night attack tactics, exploiting the fact that Tang's low silhouette and black paint rendered her nearly invisible on moonless nights. He even practiced engine drift tracking, cutting propulsion and letting Tang glide silently behind targets to reduce noise and detection risk. Every modification he made, every drill, every maneuver, was designed to raise the odds of success while lowering exposure. Tang would be both hunter and phantom. By January 8, 1944, after months of training and shakedown cruises, Tang arrived at Pearl Harbor, fully combat-ready. The Pacific Submarine Force was undergoing a quiet revolution. For the first time since the war began, America's submariners had weapons that worked as designed. That had not always been the case. For 2 long years, U.S. submarines had been crippled by catastrophic torpedo defects that sabotaged their effectiveness. The much-touted Mark 14 torpedo, the Navy's primary weapon, was plagued by a trifecta of design failures. First, the depth control mechanism was flawed. Torpedoes set to run at 10 feet would actually travel 10 feet deeper, slipping uselessly beneath enemy keels. Second, the contact exploder, meant to detonate on impact, often failed entirely. Torpedoes would strike targets and simply bounce off or shatter apart. Third, the magnetic influence exploder, intended to detonate beneath a ship's hull for maximum destruction, malfunctioned due to variations in the Earth's magnetic field, exploding prematurely or not at all. The result was a nightmare for early submarine crews. They fired perfect spreads, watched torpedoes strike true, only to see their prey sail away unharmed. Reports poured in from across the Pacific, but the Bureau of Ordnance refused to admit fault, insisting the torpedoes were flawless and that submarine captains were simply poor shots. It took Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of submarines Pacific ComSubPac, to force a reckoning. He ordered live-fire tests. Submarines fired torpedoes through underwater nets, proving they ran deeper than set. Others were fired into cliffs, showing a failure rate of over 70% for contact detonations. By mid-1943, the evidence was undeniable. The Bureau had to concede and redesign. Depth controls were corrected, contact exploders rebuilt, and the magnetic system permanently disabled. By the year's end, the torpedoes finally did what they were supposed to do: explode. This change marked a turning point. In 1942, hundreds of attacks had yielded meager success. In 1943, results improved slightly but remained inconsistent. By 1944, with the torpedoes fully functional and commanders trained in new tactics, U.S. submarines became the deadliest anti-shipping force in history. Tang entered the fight at exactly that moment, a perfect weapon at the perfect time, commanded by an officer who had mastered the science of attack. On January 22, 1944, Tang departed Pearl Harbor for her first war patrol, heading for the Caroline and Mariana Islands. Her baptism of fire came on February 17th. Tang had trailed a convoy of 2 freighters guarded by 5 escorts. As she prepared to strike, a destroyer suddenly appeared at 7,000 yards, closing fast. O'Kane ordered Tang deep. 5 depth charges exploded nearby, thunderous but ineffective. When the danger passed, Tang resurfaced to periscope depth and resumed her approach. At 1,500 yards, O'Kane fired a 4-torpedo spread. 3 slammed into the 6,800-ton Gyotan Maru, splitting her midsection and sending her under within minutes. 5 days later, Tang struck again, this time under cover of darkness. Sleeping within 1,500 yards, O'Kane unleashed another salvo. The Fukuyama Maru erupted in a firestorm of secondary explosions. 2 hours later, Tang destroyed a second ship, the Yamashimo Maru, when its ammunition cargo detonated after the torpedo strikes. By the end of her first patrol, Tang had fired all 24 torpedoes, scoring 16 direct hits and sinking 5 ships totaling roughly 18,000 tons. For this devastating debut, O'Kane received the Navy Cross, and his crew earned the coveted Submarine Combat Patrol insignia, awarded only to boats that sank confirmed enemy vessels. Tang's second patrol began on March 16, 1944, targeting Japanese shipping around the Palau Islands, Davao Gulf, and the approaches to Truk. For weeks, she prowled the sea lanes, making 5 surface contacts but finding few opportunities to attack. The Imperial Japanese Navy had grown cautious, rerouting convoys away from known hunting grounds. Instead of chasing targets, Tang was assigned an entirely different mission, one that would test her crew's courage in another way. She was ordered to perform lifeguard duty near Truk Lagoon, the heavily fortified Japanese stronghold, during a major series of American carrier raids when U.S. Navy aircraft struck Truk on April 29, 1944, the sky filled with flak and flame. Dozens of planes were hit, their crews bailing out over open water. Tang positioned herself at the lagoon's edge, ready to rescue any downed airmen. For 3 days, O'Kane and his men pulled aviators from the sea, 22 in total, including 9 saved by a Vought OS-2U Kingfisher floatplane that had landed inside the lagoon to recover survivors. The overloaded Kingfisher couldn't take off again. O'Kane surfaced Tang nearby, brought the airmen aboard, and ordered the floatplane scuttle to prevent enemy capture. The daring rescue became one of the most dramatic operations of the war, earning Tang's crew a Presidential Unit Citation. More than that, it showed O'Kane's character. A commander willing to risk his submarine, his crew's lives, not just for destruction, but to save others. When Tang returned to Pearl Harbor on May 15, she had fired no torpedoes, but had achieved something just as valuable, a triumph of courage and humanity in the middle of total war. Tang's third patrol. The most devastating of the war, Tang's third patrol would go down as the most successful single deployment by any submarine in World War II. In late May 1944, O'Kane requested assignment to the East China and Yellow Seas, some of the most dangerous waters in the Pacific. These shallow, confined seas bordered heavily patrolled Japanese territory, but they were also thick with merchant traffic supplying the home islands. O'Kane knew the risks and the opportunities. Tang departed Pearl Harbor on June 8, 1944, fully loaded with 24 Mark 18 electric torpedoes. These new weapons were powered by batteries instead of compressed air, producing no telltale wake for enemy lookouts to follow. They were truly invisible killers. By summer 1944, the Yellow Sea had become a slaughterhouse for Japanese shipping. Years of American submarine attacks had forced Japan to move its dwindling merchant fleet in large, heavily guarded convoys. But this defensive shift backfired. American submarines, equipped with radar, could now detect convoys from over 15 miles away, even in darkness. Once found, these massive convoys were easy to trail and intercept. The Imperial Navy's outdated anti-submarine warfare doctrine was no match for the stealth and precision of modern US boats. Japan's failure to develop effective convoy defense was one of the war's great strategic mysteries. As an island nation utterly dependent on maritime supply, it should have made anti-submarine tactics a top priority, yet cultural bias and outdated thinking crippled the effort. Unlike Britain, which had faced Germany's U-boats by organizing disciplined convoys, developing radar, sonar, and escort tactics, Japan remained fixated on offensive surface battles. Protecting merchant ships was considered a secondary, unglamorous task unworthy of elite officers or new technology. When Japan finally formed the Grand Escort Command in November 1943, it was already too late. The force received obsolete destroyers and converted patrol craft with primitive sonar and limited depth charges. Planners had asked for 360 anti-submarine escorts. They got only 40 sent. Most lacked air cover, proper training, or coordination. Even worse, Japanese escort doctrine emphasized aggressive counterattacks rather than guarding the convoy. When a submarine struck, the escorts would break formation to chase it, leaving the remaining ships exposed to follow-up attacks. American commanders quickly learned to exploit this fatal habit. Sometimes one U.S. submarine would attack first, drawing off escorts, while another moved in to finish the defenseless convoy. Tang, though operating alone, applied the same principle, attacking hard, then slipping away while her victims burned. By 1944, Japan's shipbuilding capacity could not keep pace with its losses. Her yards could produce about 1 million tons of shipping per year, while U.S. submarines were destroying more than 2 million tons annually. The equation was merciless. Every convoy sunk meant fewer supplies, less food, and less fuel reaching Japan's shores. The strangulation of Japan's empire was not happening in naval duels or air raids. It was unfolding quietly, mathematically, beneath the waves. June 24, 1944. Southwest of Kagoshima, Tang's radar picked up a massive formation. 6 large cargo ships guarded by 16 escorts, the biggest convoy O'Kane had ever seen. For 4 tense hours, he shadowed them, using Tang's superior surface speed to race ahead, then submerging to lie in wait along their course. As night fell, O'Kane raised the periscope one last time. The convoy loomed out of the dark, moving in 2 neat columns, their wakes glowing faintly in the moonlight. At 2,300 hours, he gave the order. Tang fired 3 torpedoes at the nearest ship in the lead column, then swung her bow and launched 3 more at a target in the far column. 6 steel sharks sped silently through the black water. Seconds later, the ocean erupted. 6 tremendous explosions ripped through the convoy. O'Kane dove Tang deep, expecting a furious counterattack, and it came but wildly. Depth charges thundered in the distance, nowhere near her actual position. When he returned to periscope depth half an hour later, the sight that greeted him was beyond expectation. Chaos. Flames lit the sea. 4 ships were either sinking, burning, or motionless. Post-war records later revealed the astonishing truth: the tight convoy formation had doomed itself. The 3 torpedoes aimed at one distant ship had struck 3 separate vessels in a single spread. Tang had sunk Tamahoko Maru, Tainan Maru, Nasusan Maru, and Kenichi Maru. Over 16,000 tons of shipping destroyed in minutes. It was the most successful single torpedo attack of the entire war. 6 torpedoes fired, 4 ships gone. Each of those vessels had taken months to construct and carried supplies critical to Japan's war effort. O'Kane had erased them in less than 15 minutes. The following day, USS Tang came across 2 freighters escorted by a pair of patrol vessels. O'Kane fired 3 torpedoes at the larger target and 2 at the smaller. The first ship vanished in a massive detonation. One of the torpedoes must have struck her boilers, setting off a catastrophic explosion that tore the vessel apart. As Tang dove to avoid counterattack, the crew below heard 2 more explosions as the remaining torpedoes hit the second freighter. Depth charges followed for nearly 40 minutes, shaking the submarine violently, but Tang escaped with only minor damage. On August 14, Tang engaged a Japanese patrol yacht with her 4-inch 50-caliber deck gun, blasting its superstructure into wreckage. After scoring 8 direct hits, 8 days later, the submarine sank a 225-foot patrol vessel with a combination of gunfire and torpedoes. Tang's 4th patrol proved O'Kane's tactical adaptability. He used the deck gun when torpedoes were wasteful, stalked solitary ships when convoys were too well protected, and surfaced at night after aircraft forced him down by day. By the end of this patrol, Tang had destroyed 6 additional ships, 3 of which were smaller patrol craft. By September 1944, Tang had completed 4 war patrols in just 9 months, credited with 31 ships sunk, totaling 227,800 tons. Later corrected to 33 ships and 116,454 tons after the war. Even with revisions, these figures kept Tang at the top of all American submarines for both ships sunk and tonnage destroyed. Commander Richard O'Kane became the highest-scoring submarine commander in U.S. naval history, and his crew the most decorated and experienced undersea team in the Pacific. Tang departed Pearl Harbor on September 24, 1944. For her 5th and final patrol, O'Kane requested the Formosa Strait, a perilous stretch between Taiwan and mainland China, thick with mines, patrols, and vital Japanese shipping. Commander John Koenig, leading a coordinated wolf pack with submarines Silversides, Trigger, and Salmon, offered O'Kane a chance to join. He refused. Tang would operate alone. After refueling at Midway on September 27th, she set course for the Formosa Strait and was never heard from again. Her fate would later be reconstructed from O'Kane's debrief and survivor testimony. On the night of October 10 to 11, Tang intercepted a Japanese convoy and sent 2 cargo ships, Joshugo and Oita Maru, to the bottom. Continuing patrol, she detected another convoy on October 23rd, this one consisting of 3 tankers, a transport, a freighter, and multiple escorts. O'Kane planned a night surface attack, his favorite tactic. Tang's matte black paint and low silhouette rendered her almost invisible, while radar granted her eyes the enemy lacked. At midnight, Tang penetrated the convoy formation. O'Kane fired multiple torpedoes at the tankers. 2 struck the nearest amidships. 1 slammed into the stern of another, and 2 more ripped through the 3rd stack and engine room. Explosions followed in rapid succession. Within minutes, all 3 tankers were burning or sinking. As O'Kane prepared to engage another ship, a Japanese transport suddenly charged toward Tang in an attempted ramming attack. O'Kane ordered flank speed, steering between the transport and a burning tanker. The 2 enemy vessels collided in the confusion, and Tang's 4 stern torpedoes finished them both. The scene descended into chaos. Ships ablaze, escorts dropping depth charges blindly, the convoy scattering in panic. Tang had shattered the entire formation in minutes. Resuming her hunt near Turnabout Island, Tang's radar picked up yet another large convoy at 2,100 hours on October 24. As searchlights probed the night, O'Kane selected his targets and fired a spread. A destroyer maneuvering to attack exploded, either struck by one of Tang's torpedoes or by friendly fire, and in the confusion, a transport and tanker were also destroyed. Japanese records later confirmed the losses of Kogen Maru and Matsumoto Maru, totaling over 13,000 tons. By 0230 on October 25, Tang had expended 23 of her 24 torpedoes. The exhausted crew, elated after 2 nights of relentless action, prepared for one final strike before turning home to glory. O'Kane identified a lone cargo ship fleeing the devastation and maneuvered into position. At 0230, he ordered the firing of the last torpedo, a Mark 18 electric. It left the tube cleanly, slicing into the sea, then suddenly broached, spraying water, and began turning sharply left. In horror, the crew realized it was making a circular run, coming back toward Tang. O'Kane ordered emergency speed, attempting to evade, but after 20 seconds, The rogue torpedo slammed into Tang's stern, just 20 feet from her launch point. The 575-pound Torpex warhead detonated, blowing off the aft section and flooding 3 compartments instantly. The concussion shattered bones as far forward as the control room. The stern plunged, dragging the submarine downward. 9 men were topside when the explosion hit. O'Kane, thrown clear, found himself in the ocean, alongside boatswain's mate William Leibold and radioman Floyd Caverly from within the shattered hull. Lieutenant CMDR Lawrence Savatkin, the engineering officer, somehow escaped through a flooded conning tower, a near impossible feat. Tang settled on the bottom at 180 feet. In the forward torpedo room, 30 survivors gathered, preparing to escape using the Momsen lung, a breathing device never successfully employed in combat conditions. The escape trunk could fit 8 men at a time. They had to flood it, equalize pressure, and ascend slowly to avoid the bends, a deadly nitrogen bubble condition caused by rapid ascent. 13 men attempted the escape. 8 perished, either drowned or crippled by decompression. 5 reached the surface alive. Torpedoman Pete Nozielski, torpedoman second class Hayes Trucker, machinist's mate second class Jesse Da Silva, machinist's mate third class Clayton Decker, and Lieutenant J.G. Henry Flanagan. Along with O'Kane, Leibold, Caverly, and Savatkin, they survived 8 hours adrift before capture at dawn by a Japanese escort vessel, the same ship carrying wounded survivors of Tang's attacks. When these survivors recognized their attackers, they beat and tortured the 9 Americans brutally. Later, O'Kane would write that when his men realized their tormentors were the mutilated survivors of their own sinkings, they found they could endure it with less bitterness. The 9 were transported to Japan, held first at Ofuna Naval Prison, then Omori POW camp, enduring starvation and abuse but surviving the war. 78 of Tang's crew died, still entombed in the submarine lying in 180 feet of water off the Formosa Strait, now Chinese territory. The loss of Tang to her own final torpedo, after the most successful patrol in submarine history, was a tragic twist of fate. In that patrol alone, Tang had sunk 13 ships, totaling 107,324 tons across all 5 patrols. 33 ships amounting to 116,454 tons were confirmed sunk in only 9 months, a record unmatched by any U.S. submarine. When the war ended in August 1945, the 9 survivors were freed and returned home. O'Kane received the Medal of Honor from President Harry S. Truman on March 27, 1946, praised for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity during Tang's final engagements. He also earned 3 Navy Crosses, 3 Silver Stars, and the Legion of Merit with Valor. Remaining in the Navy, O'Kane commanded submarine tenders, testified at war crimes tribunals, and later led Submarine Division 32, retiring as a Rear Admiral in 1957. He died on February 16, 1994, at age 82. Still the most successful submarine commander in U.S. history, Tang earned 4 battle stars and 2 presidential unit citations. She was officially stricken from the Navy Register on February 8, 1945. 40 years later, in 1985, 5 of the 9 survivors reunited to honor their 78 fallen crewmates and the boat that had achieved the impossible. Japan's inability to stop submarines like Tang revealed fatal flaws in its anti-submarine warfare doctrine. As a maritime nation dependent on shipping, like Britain, it should have made convoy defense a priority. Instead, its navy obsessed over battleships and decisive engagements. The Grand Escort Command, established only in late 1943, received obsolete vessels, untrained crews, and minimal support. By 1944, U.S. submarines were sinking 250,000 tons of Japanese shipping per month. That year alone, they destroyed 2.7 million tons, a collapse that choked Japan's imports from 16 million to 10 million tons, crippling its industry. The Strategic Bombing Survey later concluded that This undersea campaign was perhaps the most decisive factor in the collapse of Japan's economy and war effort. Tang's record was a microcosm of that campaign. U.S. submarines, only 1.6% of the Navy's manpower, accounted for 56% of all Japanese shipping losses and 201 warships, including a battleship, 8 carriers, and 11 cruisers. The same Mark 18 torpedo that made Tang so deadly also destroyed her. It was faster, quieter, and more reliable than its predecessors, but not immune to malfunction. Its gyroscope or propellers could fail, sending it into a lethal loop. Tang's tragic end was not from enemy fire, but from technology turning on its master. The escape of 5 men from the sunken hull using Momsen lungs was unprecedented, an act of sheer will under crushing pressure. The 4 survivors on the surface, hurled clear or escaping from the conning tower, endured 8 hours in cold, debris-strewn seas before capture. Their survival, captivity, and endurance became legend among submariners. Post-war, O'Kane's rise to admiral and the survivors' reunions symbolized resilience. At those gatherings, they remembered the 78 men who went down, those who drowned during escape attempts, and those sealed forever in the forward compartments. Today, Tang's wreck rests silently in the Formosa Strait, her hull broken but her legacy intact. She remains a war grave, untouched by divers, preserved by depth and respect. Her story lives through records, O'Kane's writings, survivor memoirs, and the final mission exhibit at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, where visitors can relive her last moments and discover whether their crewmates survived. Tang's record stands unmatched. 33 ships sunk in 5 patrols, 10 ships in 36 days on her third, and 13 on her final. On average, she sank a ship every 10 days, crippling Japan's supply chain and hastening its defeat. Her achievements proved the power of precision, courage, and relentless training. Her fate, struck by her own torpedo at the peak of triumph, remains one of history's most haunting ironies. The same weapon that brought her glory also brought her end, yet her crew's valor, their daring attacks, and the survival of 9 against all odds ensured Tang's place as the greatest American submarine of World War II, a story of brilliance, tragedy, and immortality beneath the sea.